So, hello, Lusa. I think if we start by just introducing ourselves, it will be really great. So, my name is Tariro Macheru, and I am a third year Cranmer ordinand. And I've just invited you here so that we can just have a conversation about the Black History Month project that we're doing. So, if you just want to introduce yourself for everyone.
Hi, Terero, and hello, everyone. My name is Lusa. I was a Cranmer ordinand in 2007, 2008, and I'm now serving in the Diocese of Leicester as the Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic Mission and Ministry Enabler. And I've been here in this role for 3 years, following an incumbency in Rochester Diocese.
Wow, that sounds like a mouthful. I'm not sure I'll remember all the words, but I'm sure you'll tell us more about that. But before we go to that, so you are a priest. How did you come to faith? How did you get to be a priest? What was your journey like?
Well, I grew up as part of a Christian family, and in many ways, church, God, were part of my daily life. And in fact, I never came to a point where I ever challenged or questioned the value of that as a life choice. But I think it's in my teenage years where, in some ways, I went through a process where the relationship with the institution of the church felt uninspiring and dry in many ways. And somehow that started to impact on my sense of identity as a Christian. And in interaction with a number of people, most of them were friends of my parents. And I probably should have said from the outset that my dad is a minister. So I grew up for most of my life knowing a dad who was in ministry. Yeah. And so a number of his friends would come and stay with us, and it gave us a good excuse and a good opportunity to just have a chat with them about faith and church and so on. And for me, around those 10 years, I got to a point where it felt that I needed to make a choice of either make Christianity something that was personal to me, or take a different route and move away from a kind of inherited expression of what it means to be Christian. And then from then on, I started to deepen my faith and my understanding of myself, of the world around me, and of God, and also developing a sense of how I could play my God-given role in the world. And I guess to cut a long story short, for me, I think out of the many options that were presented to me, the one that seemed the most compelling and the most in tune with what I felt within myself was the sense of giving myself wholly to serving God and the church as a minister.
Wow, that's great. I can tell so much joy just coming out from the way you're smiling. So you mentioned that you were an ordinand here at Cranmer Hall. So were you always in the UK? Did all of this happen also in this country? Tell us a little bit more about that.
No, I was born in God's own country, the very democratic Republic of Congo. So as a child, I lived the first 8 years of my life between DRC, which at the time was called Zaire, and the Central African Republic, back and forth and essentially because my dad was training and studying theology. Yeah. And eventually we moved to Belgium, where he came to pursue a PhD in theology, started working with churches there. And so I grew up most of my sort of later pre-teen years and then teenage years and early adult years in Belgium. Moved to the UK in August 2001, and I was there working with a French-speaking congregation that is often known as the Walloon and Huguenot Church that meets in the crypt of Canterbury Cathedral. And so it's one of those historic churches of the refuge that welcomed Protestant refugees who were fleeing persecution from what is today's France and Belgium, and were given asylum and refuge and sanctuary in the UK, but also a place to worship. And so Canterbury Cathedral, and more specifically its crypt, became their home. And a few centuries later, they had a young Black minister, or actually I was lay at the time, a young Black Christian working and ministering in their midst, and then progressively kind of explored different pathways as to where God was calling me, and then find myself exploring ministry within the Church of England.
Wow.
And was then recommended for training, and ended up in Cranmer and Durham, which interestingly enough was not the initial plan, but I was quite pleased that I ended up and spending time in Cranmer.
Okay, so you mentioned that it wasn't the initial plan. Was that in terms of choice of college, or where you thought your life would end up?
No, in fact, well, I guess a bit of both, because where I thought my life would head to when I was in Canterbury with the French Church was to go and work with the French Reformed Church in Paris. Okay. And I was exploring the opportunities there, and everything seems to be falling into place, except for a deep sense in me that this wasn't where I felt God was calling me. I'm slightly disappointed, as Paris is one of my favorite cities in the world, and I always dreamt of living and working there.
Yeah.
But also, I think when I was recommended, initially the thought was to go to one of the Cambridge colleges. Okay. But then talking to the DDO, there was a real sense that because I hadn't grown up in England, and if I did indeed have a sense of calling to serve the church in England, it was important for me to experience something different about England. And having lived most of my British time in the Southeast, Cambridge felt, I think, very much like a comfort zone. And I was really grateful for the opportunity of exploring something different. And Durham and the Northeast felt like an ideal place to experience something different about English identity and culture. Although Durham in itself feels like a little enclave in the Northeast. But yes, I loved my time there and love exploring and discovering something of the history, the rich culture, also of the Northeast and its old mining villages, and some of the socioeconomic challenges that, at least at the time, were quite apparent for me.
Okay, no, that's quite interesting. I think there is a lot that I can relate to in what you've just shared over there. So just your experience of Durham, your experience of being part of Cranmer Hall in St. John's College, what stood out for you? What were some of the highlights that you can share?
Well, I guess one of the highlights is that I met the woman who's now my wife while I was there. She was also a student there. She was there as an independent student from the Netherlands. Okay. And I think at the time, I don't know what the picture is now, but at the time, Cranmer Hall was not as diverse ethnically and culturally as it may be now. And so being the two foreigners, we kind of forged a bond that is lasting to this day. So that in itself is a huge highlight. But I think for me, it was also being part of a community that was intentionally built around a rhythm of life, and a rhythm framed around prayer and worship, study and service, and I think a pattern that I found really helpful, especially when I then went into parish ministry, and I really valued that. I was quite grateful also to experience something about a version of Englishness that I hadn't been exposed to at the time. And I remember, I think one of the first weeks I was there, I was in town and listening, or rather hearing people talking and wondering what language that was, only to realize that those people were speaking English. And for me, it was also being exposed to the breadth of English accents from the north, because at the time there were a number of ordinands who came from some of the northern dioceses, and that in itself was rich and not a culture shock per se, but culturally enhancing experience for me, and that was really positive.
Yeah, it's definitely different, Durham, from some of the other cities. So I come from Birmingham, which is very multicultural. And so when I came to Durham, I could definitely tell that it's different. And it's been, like you said, a space where I've learned a lot about the English culture as well. So yeah, if you were to come back to Cranmer, what would you change in the things that you did, or the things that you got involved in, or the things that you saw?
Yeah. So I was in Cranmer only for a year, which in some ways didn't give me a full experience of what it means to train in that context. I was resident in college, which I found quite tricky, because I felt that my living space was kind of shrunk and narrowed, and I was there as a single ordinand as well. And I think it took some adapting to college life and to community life and rhythm, even though I think I valued quite a bit of that. One of the things that I would definitely want to pay more attention to, or to encourage the college to pay more attention to, is I think what could be framed as the assumption of default whiteness, both in the culture that is developed around the college, but also in the way in which knowledge and learning was approached. And it felt to me that I think we could have done a lot more in paying attention to global voices, and opening ourselves to perspectives that I think transcended Englishness, and a specific understanding of Englishness as well, in the way in which we looked at theological formation, but also ministerial formation. So, I mean, I don't know what it is like today, but it's certainly something that I would want to encourage the college to look at and experience. And looking back, I realized how acutely, or how I felt to being a Black man into that space, and which is not in negation with who I was, but I think the context and the culture kind of othered me in a way that wasn't necessarily kind of affirming.
Okay. Okay. Well, I've been here and this is my third year, and you'll be glad to know that the college for the past, I think, just over a year now has been doing a lot of work, and, you know, about having global voices, like you've mentioned, being inclusive in the way that we do worship, in the way that we even pray and so forth. So definitely there's been a lot of work that has been happening since you left. So I'm sure that will give you some joy to know that a lot has changed, but yeah, and there is still more work that just keeps on happening. But it's good to hear that. And I think for myself as well, to just hear your story and learn from some of the things that you have mentioned. So you mentioned that you were just here for a year. What happened after that? How did things progress?
Yeah, so I was there for a year because I'd done some theological study prior to training on the whole, and I'd also been in active ministry, albeit with a different tradition. And I think the church felt that they didn't need to lock me in that in theological college for longer than I needed to be. So following Cranmer Hall, I went back to Canterbury, which was my ascending diocese, and served a curacy in a rural parish. Spent 4 years there that were really, really exciting. But I think for me, one of the highlights was that within a month following my ordination, the Lambeth Conference was being held in Canterbury, and I was privileged enough to be asked to be the deacon of the inaugural Mass, and I also served during the Lambeth Conference as a rapporteur, and so being privy to some of the conversations that bishops were having. And really for me, it opened my eyes to the breadth of Anglican identity and experience, and realizing right from the outset that being Anglican is being part of a global family of Christians who may not always agree on everything, but who are committed to kind of wrestle with each other in as much love as possible to try and walk together and be Christ's presence in the world we inhabit. And so that was great. So I served in curacy in that context, and then moved from there into a parish in Rochester Diocese in a town called Gravesend, which was socially, culturally, and historically radically different to the rural context that I just left. But that again, a great opportunity for learning and growth.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's really great. I think, just what you're talking about, how being exposed in different contexts and how from each context there is so much to learn, just speaks a lot into how we can learn anything from anyone and in any place. So where are you now? So tell us a little bit more of what you're currently doing now. I'm sure you told me the name, but it's such a mouthful.
So I'm moving slightly closer to Durham, but still kind of gravitating towards the south. And I'm now in the Midlands, in the pearl of the Midlands in Leicester.
Okay.
And I've been here 3 years, serving as Black, Asian, and minority ethnic mission and ministry enabler. And I'm sure whoever came up with that title was really inspired that day.
Yes, definitely.
Well, in short, part of this role is one of those roles that are funded by what is often referred to as the Strategic Development Fund, which is an initiative that the Church has put nationally, where it's funding projects that are essentially aimed at church growth, but also creating a space where we learn and develop as a body in capacity to minister with and to the communities in which we're set. And the particular focus of the work that I'm leading here is on helping the Diocese of Leicester, I guess, build both capacity, confidence, and competence in its ministry with and to be a people from the global majority. And I guess the genesis of it is realizing that we are, as a diocese, set up in a context that is ethnically and culturally diverse, but failing to see that diversity being replicated in the pews of our churches, in the pulpit of our churches as well, but also in all of the governing bodies of our institution. And so part of what we're trying to do is help the diocese be a lot more effective in the way in which it ministers with and to people from the global majority. And the particular angle that we are taking is not creating kind of homogeneous circles and setups where we might try to go for quick gains, but we are trying to be intentional in creating what we call intercultural worshiping communities, where people of different ethnic and cultural background come intentionally together, learn from another, and sharpen each other's understanding of self, the other, and ultimately of God, and hopefully creating missional spaces that are inclusive and probably more reflective of what we think is the ultimate vocation of the church, to be a space where all cultures and languages are gathered before God in service, learning, and worship.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that sounds like really amazing work that you're doing.
It
And
is.
I'm just wondering, is this something that is just happening within your diocese, or is this something that's happening across other dioceses in the UK? I don't know. Do you work with other people? How is that?
Yeah, so part of our commitment is that we believe that we are a connected and an interrelated body, an interdependent body. In many ways, we don't believe that Leicester is an exception and is an isolated space, but it's a space that is nurtured, shaped, and inspired by the global environment in which we set up, and more particularly the boundaries of the Church of England that we are part of. And while the frame that we've given this work within Leicester Diocese is particular, it's not unique in itself. And you've mentioned Birmingham. In fact, we're doing some really, well, as close work as possible with Birmingham Diocese. And in fact, as a result of the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and the need for more intentional anti-racism efforts, we are also developing initiatives with all the Midlands dioceses in trying to create pathways through which we work and partner together, because we're realizing that nobody really has got the answer, and we're all asking similar questions. But each of us have got particular perspectives that we're bringing to the table, but also highlighting the fact that across the Church of England as a whole, we are being a lot more intentional in asking questions around presence and representation of people from the global majority in the structures, but also in all aspects of our shared life. And a lot more intentional in developing initiatives and projects that specifically target those constituencies. And I mean, there's some really creative work done in Manchester Diocese as well. And I know other places who are doing some really creative work. And so that's very encouraging. The challenge is that we all starting from a relatively low threshold. But the good news is that we can only grow, and the picture can only take us to a place where we become a lot more integrated, both ethnically and culturally.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess to just follow that up, what can we do as the wider church, even just as people who are also in training, to help in that work and to allow for our church to be inclusive, and I guess in all areas, even outside the church?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's something that I have found helpful for me is rather than running for a solution, learning how to live with the questions. And I think there are a number of questions that are being asked of us as an institution, but also as individual Christians, and also as a nation, especially in terms of the legacy of imperialism, colonialism, slave trade, and how racism has kind of weaved itself through all our lives and all our structures. And it would be easy to be moral givers or lesson givers. And I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of dwell with the questions in a creative way. And those of you who are in theological training and who are wrestling with concept and ideas, with vision of the church, both in its heritage and also its future shape, I think you are some of the key voices that might help us think these things through, but also kind of preparing yourselves to be released uh, into the wider world, with some of the learning and the gifts that you would have accumulated in the past 2 or 3 years, and continue to ask questions of ourselves and of the church, and continue to challenge us in imagining the church beyond received categories. And I'm just currently thinking and writing about Afrofuturism as a potential missional lens for us, and how at the heart of it is an invitation to imagination and reimagination beyond received categories. And it seems to me that there is something that we can do collectively about entering this space, freeing ourselves from the shackles of institution, without denying the heritage that we have, that we're coming from and entering into, but also believing and dreaming of a church that will be closer to the vision of the church as we see it in Revelation.
Yeah, that will be really great, and I look forward to reading your work when it's all written and done. I guess to just round this off, I will tap into some of your wisdom and your experience. What words of advice would you give to young people, to anybody really, in terms of, just promoting, supporting, being inclusive? Because I know it's Black History Month and it's celebrated in different areas, in different ways, not just within the church. So yeah, what words of advice would you give with that as somebody who's BAME yourself?
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I'm picking up also in engaging with literature and work around Afrofuturism is that kind of rethinking and reframing of the conversation. And one of the concepts that really resonated with me was thinking not just in terms of Black history, but also in terms of Black future. And
I like that.
Yeah, I really like that, because often in casting our eyes only in one direction, we fail to pay attention to the steps that we're taking towards carving a future where all can flourish. And so my sense is that if Black future becomes our preoccupation, then it will reset our focus in terms of how we shape the present in creating platforms that will amplify Black experiences, Black voices, but also reframe the way in which we've told Black experience in the context of global story. I'm not advocating a divorce from history, because I think history is crucial. And I myself come from a culture and a tradition where we have a vision of history that is not just linear, but that is where past, present, and future are collapsed on each other, and the sense that actually every moment is intimately linked to the past and intimately connected to the future. And so, yes, if there is one word of wisdom, one word of advice, is to encourage people to start thinking and investing their energy and resources in framing a world in which Black future will be positive, or will be possible, and a Black future that is a flourishing one. And not just for those of us with more melanin than others, but actually a world where all of us will be able to flourish and somehow define personhood and identity beyond racialized selves.
Wow. There is a lot that I've just taken from what you've said. And I think more importantly, the idea of the Black future. And I think you're quite right that we can't divorce our past, but there is so much positive things that we can take, that we can celebrate. And there is so much more that we can focus on than just what happened behind us and how bad or how wrong it might have been. Well, thank you very much, Lusa. It's been a joy talking to you, just hearing your stories and some of the work that you're doing. And I just hope that not just myself, but everybody who's going to hear of all of this will be able to take something and be able to learn something for not just today, but the future, like you said.
Sorry, thank you very much.